encryption, algorithms also play a big part, computer network operations, all this comes into cognitive warfare. Next, please. So, strategic communication, if, since we are talking about Indian context, if we can have these four verticals sort of established well or thought about, then we can come into the understanding of what can be done. So PR, of course, everyone knows, public relations, multimedia engagement operations, public diplomacy, social media influence operations. So what are they? PR is upfront information dissemination. Today's conference or conclave can be issued, the press release can be issued at the end of it. That is PR. That is a public relations or press release will be given. It is designed by and handled by designated spokespersons. So it is what I call telling the story. If you go to multimedia operations, public diplomacy, social media influence operations, they contribute to what is called narrative building, narrative escalation, narrative moderation. And of course, at the end of it, when you have think tanks, owners and practitioners of platforms, when all of them come together, they're actually selling the idea. This is telling and that is selling. Next, please. So PR is overt. All those other three can be overt with deniability, and of course covert. So this has to be understood. Which one do we need to practice, or do we practice all of them simultaneously in different domains? So it is also designed for internal audience and stakeholders, because you cannot ignore your internal audience or your internal citizens. External audience and stakeholders, all of them become your consumers of the strategic communication in the overall context. Next, please. So, in my own small way, I've tried to design an organizational chart. Whether it is correct, not correct, we can discuss that. And that is the purpose of putting this through. And because all stakeholders in the government need to be on one platform, we have designed it like this. This is what I have thought about, that there could be, and I think my friend General Raj Shukla has been mentioning this, why not have a Deputy NSA strategic communication? When you have Deputy NSA strategic affairs, you have Deputy NSA internal affairs. Why not have this? Because this is acquired great importance in today's warfare and in cognitive warfare. So can we have this, all of these verticals? They are, I know, in too many details. You don't need to read all of them, but I'll just highlight 2 or 3. That you need to develop messages and themes, not when the crisis occurs, but before the crisis comes. It has to be a continuous operation. It has to be something that you have to do day in, day out, even when there's peace or relative peace. And that is something that is not being done. We have actually woken up when a crisis hits, and then we do what is called crisis communication, rather than strategic communication. Crisis communication and strategic communication are 2 different things. So therefore, can we do this? Can there be a concerted, uniform attempt to develop writers, authors? As all of you know, perhaps, that the Pentagon has 2 officers posted to Hollywood to make films that glorify US armed forces. Black Hawk Down, that movie, US had lost the war there, or the conflict there, the skirmish there, but they glorified that operation. Ergo, which happened in Iran many years ago, how they rescued those, the Canadians who were there, or the Americans who were taken hostage, or many other, even Top Gun was designed to show the superiority of the American Air Force or the Naval Air Force. But now you have proliferation of OTTs. Is there an attempt to do stories based on real-life achievements of the armed forces or the government? Yes, perhaps this has started. I see a concerted attempt being done with the Bollywood producers and directors. You can call it Dhurandhar or Uri or any of those movies that have come as part of that. But that's one small part. There should be content writers, there should be documentaries on Netflix or Discovery or Amazon, wherever. Then there should be institutional interface. Are think tanks being used in the right way? Are think tanks being used to propagate messages or develop a strategic culture? That is the question we need to ask. And sometimes even prominent business houses need to know what is the Indian approach to foreign policy or national security policy, and they are groping in the dark. Is there an outreach to them? Because they can design their businesses accordingly. So many things can be done in that. Similarly, apex level Stratcom, can we do all this in under one roof or under one organization? Is the question I am posing. I'm not saying this is already done and dusted, but I'm posing this question. Next, please. So can we have it like this? Next, please go through the full thing. So I am saying, could there be directorates of PR, multimedia engagement, public diplomacy, social media influence operations? This is a whole of nation approach that everybody keeps talking about, but have we actually sort of made a journey towards it? I doubt it. Crisis Communication Center, of course, can be activated when there is a crisis. When there is cyber and intel team have to constantly keep a watch whether cyber disinformation or cyber attacks are happening. You can have narrative development, platform and institutional development. All this have to come together and somebody has to drive it, or a body has to drive it, is what my contention is. This is what I'm positing. We can discuss all this. Next, please. So which are the ministries and departments that can come into this? What is the final purpose? The purpose is this. You can read it yourself, but this is what I thought. At the end of it, the end state of strategic communication or an organization that one designs needs to do all this. If you can do that, then, of course, there are problems. Like I said, Stratcom, MEA, MOD will have differences. Like, for instance, let me take the example of Iris Dana being sunk by the submarine off the coast of Sri Lanka. Now it comes out that the Indian Navy the permission of the Indian Navy was sought by the second ship to come to Kochi, even before that ship was sunk, the Iranian ship was sunk. But we didn't use that information for strategic communication or strategic messaging. So what have we looked like? What are we looking like? That we have been caught unawares, we are flat-footed. Why couldn't that fact that the Iranian ships were seeking shelter, not just in Sri Lanka, but also in India, be communicated, may not be directly, may not be officially, but you could have used social media influencers, you could have used writers, veterans, but that didn't happen. We are looking like we have been caught unawares, and now we are trying to occupy the space which has already been occupied by the adversaries and your people who are inimical to India. So I think all these problems will come. There will be crisis, there will be turf wars between different ministries and departments. But the final consideration, in my view, if India has to play the part as it wants to play in this region at least, it needs to get this strategic communication aspect of it through an institutional mechanism which involves almost everyone, because it cannot be done by one ministry, one department, or even media. Because media, this force multiplier, media being force multiplier, is a misnomer. Media will go by what information is available. And if you don't give the information, the adversary will give. If you don't occupy the information vacuum, the adversary will. And then you start playing catch up. So I think proactive, pre-planned, well thought out, and a continuous operation which is designed to operate 24/7, 365 days a year is the need of the hour, not just reacting or responding to crises or responding to events like we've been doing and muddling through it. Sindoor, of course, we're not going to talk about at the moment. At least I'm not going to talk about it at the moment. But there are various lessons from there. And of course, the lessons from earlier operations or earlier crises that India has gone through. I'm going to stop here because there will be discussions on this. But I just wanted to set a context according to my point of view. You can differ, you can push back on it, you can criticize it. But that's something what we are here for, actually. And therefore, I thought I'll just put that out very clearly as I think it. Next and final, please. So that's my coordinates. Anyone wants to get in touch with me, they can get in touch with me here. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
Shri Gokhale, we'll request you to please remain with us on the stage for the expert session as well. You may please take your chair there. And with that, we'd also like to thank you for lending your powerful voice through this keynote for this conclave. That indeed, ladies and gentlemen, I think sets the contour for actionable insights on the doctrine, the processes, the structures, and of course, the preparedness, as we say. And ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about the preparedness part of it, in the information domain, I think it is something that is not episodic. It is absolutely continuous. It's unabatable. It is unstoppable, exactly like your grit. On that note, allow me to share with you that the upcoming expert session, as we title it, will examine strategic communication from a policy, governance, and a national security perspective. The session will, of course, be moderated by Shri Nitin Gokhale, Editor-in-Chief of BharatShakti.in and Strat News Global, who's on stage with us. May I now take the pleasure of inviting our blue ribbon panel, the expert panel, as I would like to call it, our distinguished panelists. Join me in now welcoming Ambassador Yashwardhan Sinha, a retired Indian diplomat from the 1981 batch of the Indian Foreign Service. He served in as the Chief Information Commissioner and has also served as the former High Commissioner of India to the UK and Sri Lanka, in addition to key appointments in India's diplomatic corps across countries. We welcome Ambassador Sinha on the stage. Thank you very, very much, sir, for taking out the time and joining us here. With that, we are pleased to be now inviting on stage Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj, former President, UNSC, former permanent representative of India to the UN. Ladies and gentlemen, a distinguished officer of the 1987 batch of the Indian Foreign Service, she made history, ladies and gentlemen, please note, by becoming the first Indian woman to preside over the UN Security Council, India's first female ambassador to Bhutan. We welcome you, ma'am. It's so good to be greeting you on the stage. And we'd also now like to invite Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, Param Vishisht Seva Medal, Yudh Seva Medal, Sena Medal, retired. A combat aviator and an accomplished public speaker, the officer has this abiding interest in strategic military affairs. The Honorable President was pleased to appoint General Shukla to the Officer of Member, Union Public Service Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, he's also a distinguished fellow at the Center for Land Warfare Studies Clause and a member of the Governing Council of India Foundation. And with that, Shri Gokhale, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. I think we couldn't have had a better and a more distinguished panel than what we have here to follow up on what the objective of this conclave is. Their introductions have been made, so I'm not going to take your time in introducing them. But let me invite, what I intend to do is to ask these three eminent panelists to do their opening remarks for about 9 to 10 minutes each. What they feel should be the future contours of strategic communication, architecture, system, whatever. And then we will have a discussion between ourselves based on what they have said for about 15 minutes after that. So 10 minutes each, this takes us to half an hour. Then 15 minutes of discussion between ourselves. And then we'll leave about 10 to 12 minutes for the audience if they have their questions. I hope it is okay with the lady and the gentleman. So may I invite Ambassador Yash Sinha to first give us your opening remarks. Maybe you want to go there or you can speak from here, wherever. It's your choice. Yeah, there, I think. Yeah.
Indeed, a great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank the Army Commander and his team for inviting me for the very important session on strategic communication and narrative building. In the past, we always thought that traditional communication was basically public relations. But now we have to reposition it as very much a core part of both military and state capability. So the narrative is not just about the conflict. In many cases, it is the conflict. And I'm going to now talk about my personal experiences because, I mean, we've got a very broad sweep of what in the keynote address and the opening address of what this conclave is going to discuss. But I wanted to go straight into a subject. We don't have much time, so I'm going to go straight into Op Sindoor. And I know that Nitin avoided talking about Op Sindoor, but I think I will. I recall the day, and perhaps General Raj Shukla will, we were at a TV studio, I think it was the 8th or 9th of May, when suddenly the anchor announced breaking news, Karachi has been attacked. And I think the former Air Chief was with us, Air Chief Marshal Bhadoria, and as it happened, three of us were standing next to each other in this format where you are grilled by the anchor, and we looked at each other and wondered what was happening. And the reason why I bring this up is because it's a classic case of a story, a narrative going haywire, and how people like the 24/7 TV channels, social influencers, social media undermine our own credibility. Now, what we did in Operation Sindoor, in my opinion, is a classic case of how strategic communication and narrative building, in the ultimate analysis, helped India's cause. Not just militarily, of course it did, but even in communicating to those who matter in the world what actually happened. Now, I want to go back again because I have handled our Western neighbor at various ranks for 10 years out of my 37 years, at various deputy secretary, head of the political section in Islamabad, joint secretary, additional secretary, etc. So I have seen what happens in a conflict between India and Pakistan. Now, in this particular case, what we did on the night of the 9th, 10th was actually unbelievable. We destroyed, at least severely damaged, a lot of their most important air bases. Now, just take one, Noor Khan Air Base. Noor Khan Air Base, the former PAF Shaklala, the first time I landed there was on the 1st of January 1994 as part of a delegation for foreign secretary level talks. And I have landed subsequently at least 4 or 5 times. And incidentally, Noor Khan, Air Chief Marshal Noor Khan, happened to be my landlord in Islamabad. He must be turning in his grave as to the damage that we inflicted on the command and control center. And it's just not Noor Khan. It's the PAF base in Sargodha, Mushaf, if I remember correctly, in Rahim Yar Khan, in Sindh, in Jacobabad, what we were able to achieve. And this time we had evidence. We had satellite imagery that was flashed all over. So the damage that we inflicted on Pakistan for the whole world to see. But then that came after the 10th, 11th of May. What happened before? And before, I think, the first day when we lost some aircraft, I believe we did, there was, I wouldn't call it a stunned silence, but there was certainly lacking in narrative building or promotion of your narrative. As a result, our enemy took full advantage and spread all sorts of disinformation. Pakistan is known to do that. We are aware of the disinformation that Pakistan spreads. They've used bots, they use friendly countries in Turkey and China and others to spread what is called narrative laundering. And I think that is where we learnt our lesson. And what we came up with, I think, was brilliant. When we had the lady officers from the Air Force and the Army and the Foreign Secretary speak to the media, and then later on, when you had the DGMO and his counterparts from the Navy and Air Force, I think that was brilliant. Because in my opinion, the person at a higher rank who's aware of what is happening really needs to communicate. Because a spokesperson, whether it's in the Ministry of External Affairs or in the Ministry of Defense, spews out what he is given or she is given. He or she may not be fully aware of the circumstances of the terrain in the case of the military, but a serving officer does. And that is why I was very impressed, though Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth towed a very political line and showed his lack of understanding, appreciation of the situation. But the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, was very professional. So I think there are lessons that we need to imbibe from what the best practices are in the other countries. But I think Op Sindoor taught us these lessons, and I think we've imbibed it well. The very fact that we are having a conclave in the Surya Command discussing this clearly shows the importance of narrative building and strategic communication as far as India is concerned. Because, as I said, it is not just about the conflict, it is the conflict. And you have people magnifying disinformation all over the modern information space. And unless we are able to influence the narrative, you can outgun your enemy, but you need to out-tell them. With these words, I will stop because I'm under a time constraint, but thank you very much for inviting me.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sinha. May I now invite General Raj Shukla to give his views or opening remarks? Then I'll come to.
Okay, Army Commander, Central Command, ladies and gentlemen. You know, in just 10 minutes, so just let me throw some pointers and then you can develop them when you get time to reflect. So in my view, strategic communications, you know, is a real high order attribute in the sense that I think it is a very vital subset of the information domain. In fact, the craft of leveraging the information domain is strategic communications. And the latter, the information domain itself, is a key pillar of statecraft, of our national security poise. So what we have been doing thus far is engaging with the media, so on and so forth. But if we are really talking of strategic communications, we need to invest in this in thought and in practice in a far more deeper sense. I'll strongly advise at least middle piece officers here, do read 3-4 books written by Yuval Harari, because I have not seen anybody who has, shall we say, understood this information domain as deeply as he is. And I'll just quote him. He says, from the Stone Age to the age of artificial intelligence, the story of humankind is a story of information networks. And with great facility, he understands how these things are linked. And why I say this to this military audience is that I never did this in my career. So we dealt with the press in, shall we say, very ham-handed manners. But if you understand the information domain by reading people like Yuval Harari, the true import of information will be driven home. So that's the first point I would like to make, that develop a deep understanding of the information domain. And once you do that, you will appreciate the structure and culture of networks. Each has a different character: television, print, social media. You have to see the value of the 2-minute bite, the hour-long podcast. Each has a different nuance. And the more time you spend on it, you have the advantage of, strategic military expertise. But if you understand the information domain, you will be able to craft it in far more imaginative manners. So that's the point I'll make. You have to understand your own national media. I mean, the media is just not the Delhi media, regional medias. They have deep nuances. It has been my experience after retirement, at least, that the interest in national security is far greater in non-English medias, regional medias. And they ask very deep and searching questions. All my life we did was engage with the Delhi media. I think it was a fatal mistake. I'll just give you one example of how powerful these narratives are. I think it was in 2015 when I was attending the Indian Army Pacific Chiefs Conference in Bangkok that year. General Rawat was to go. He didn't go for some reason. So as the DGPP, I went there. And from morning, it was under the aegis of the CNCI PACOM. The United States was, lecturing the whole gathering there about free and open Indo-Pacific, the freedom to navigate, 12 nautical miles, so on and so forth. And everybody was in agreement. So was I, because that was what was our position also. Just some time after lunch, there was a Chinese general who got up, and in, I must say, very clipped English and a very articulate person, he just raised this question to the gathering. He said, if you have 80 bases around you, I didn't know the Americans have 80 bases around China, and every day you send a ship out to test the principle of 12 nautical miles, is it freedom of navigation or is it coercion? And let me tell you, by evening, when we came for the cocktails, half the people were talking of coercion. And he also said that, anyway, this is a temporary phase. 10 years from now, the question will not be whether American ships stay 12 nautical miles of Shanghai. The question will be whether Chinese ships stay 12 nautical miles of Los Angeles. So the point that I'm making to you that the truth is not so relevant. What is relevant is the narrative that prevails, because either position could be right. I'll just spend a minute on how we developed in the Indian context. So if I recall, Manekshaw was, Field Marshal Manekshaw was somebody whose sheer charisma made him quite a character in the national media space. He charmed his way through the national media space. But I don't know how many of you will recall General Krishnaswamy Sundarji. He was somebody who shaped the media. I was a captain major in those times, and he was a very powerful influence in print, India Today. Television had not quite come. He was so deeply well-read, so articulate, that he set the pace. In fact, I think he launched many careers in journalism. If you are a real student of strategic communications media, do study the persona, and there are still a lot of articles floating around, because he had a deep understanding of the military space and very artfully crafted it into the media space. I think as a communicator, he was ahead of the media of those times, at least in the national security domain. But it was General B.C. Joshi, I think the Army commander mentioned this, who spoke of the media and advocated its inclusion in formal thinking and design. And I think that is what led to the ADGPI. And the point that I wish to make now is that we have now to thrust ourselves from this media engagement, ADGPI business, to this higher, more complex, sophisticated craft of strategic communications. So what does this entail? In my view, in the realm of national security, it is actually the trinity of ideation, narration, and operations that have to operate in close synchrony if you have to get good strategic communications. Without ideation, there cannot be good strategic communications. Our tragedy is that we don't invest in ideation. Look at how we starve our think tanks of funds. And we are not allowed to formally invest in communications. Why shouldn't the defense budget legitimately have 100 crores for strategic communications? It's also vital. But if you have to do this, this IFA nonsense has to be thrown out the window. The IFA is nobody to tell you that you can't pay this much to this guy. That is the decision of the Army commander, because strategic communications are a part of statecraft. It can't be caught up in these kind of things. And why I'm saying it, if we start pushing against these things happen. Everything that you push against happens one day. Ideation, clear-headed ideation is extremely important, and it just cannot be engaging with the media when a crisis descends. Strategic communications is having a long-term strategy of how you will, shall I say, position your statecraft in the information domain. So that will lead, investments of a different kind, and that is why I think a national security strategy and a national defense strategy is so important. See, it's those 30 pages that are not important. The Americans have the national security strategy, national defense strategy. They don't follow it every day. But what happens in the process of writing that national security strategy, national defense strategy, you sort out the cobwebs in your mind. And when you are doing that, I think it's also time to transit from this ADGPI to a DG Stratcom. It has to be DG Stratcom because now we are a joint force. The locus has to move from the Army. This, I think Ambassador Sinha mentioned the professionalism of Dan Kane. It's outstandingly professional. Our case, Balakot, was a disaster when we were gathering tables in front of the media. We did far better in Sindoor, but this business of Army, Navy, Air Force narrative just has to end. Aren't we a formal joint force now? There is the Chief of Defense Staff. The locus has to shift there. And the point that I wish to make is that in the development of the strategy, the strategic communications, DG Stratcom, in my view, because of the phase that we are in, must be the brightest 3-star. He must be a 3-star who's going to be a theater commander tomorrow. He must involve himself in the process. And as this process involves the various nuances, for example, what should we do with Pakistan? Should it be combat over match? What should be the asymmetric deterrence with China? How should we look at air power? What portion of it should be manned? What should be unmanned? In the process of all this, this DG Stratcom and his domain of people will understand the nuances. And they should have the talent to build stories around these nuances, to articulate the narrative around these nuances. Unless you have an understanding of operations, you will not have it. I grew up in the phase where ADG-PI was not allowed entry into the MO directorate. And we used to keep him out. It was as immature as that. It took one DGMO to, just thrust it down our throat. Now this has to change if we have to truly grow. We should be able to draw a narrative that complements Viksit Bharat. The components of a Surakshit Bharat should give you the foundation of your narrative. And this narrative should be laid by the DG Stratcom. And if we wish to integrate it at the national level, it should be DG Stratcom at the NSCS, but that and DG Stratcom should not be an officer from the government. It has to be an officer from the media or somebody from the media, somebody who understands the media space and can then craft it onto the military space. Look at what's happening in AI in Pentagon. It is people who understand AI who are driving it there. Now that model has to come. My biggest fear is that the DG Stratcom in the NSCS will be an officer from the IAS, IPS or the... Now they have lovely media rooms. He should have all those media rooms. I mean, we are now the 4th largest economy, 3rd largest in comprehensive national power. I'm making a pitch for strategic communications and informations in this grander sense. And grander, I don't mean airy-fairy, but we must start thinking big if we have to really graft this, strategic communications down. And the DG Stratcom's office must have a team of media professionals who are wordsmiths, natural communicators, who understand the network, the print, television, social media, who are digital natives and can spin these hundreds of stories, big and small. I'll tell you, I think Nitin mentioned Hollywood. Now, if that is actually the case with the American military, I saw this movie Manekshaw recently. A very charismatic figure in the cinematic sense hasn't been portrayed right at all. There is another story of Sagat Singh. If anyone wants to pick it from the media, it's such a powerful story. Even Rizangla, I think, was not made well enough. And I'm making this point because we have such powerful stories with us. If people from the media world understand those stories, they can be very powerful narratives.
Raj?
They are actually very powerful narratives. Okay, I'll just finish. I'll make just 2 more points. Okay, last point I want to make, and that is this, that if ideation, narration, and execution are strategic communications put together, we must find ways to finance them. I just don't understand this nonsense of why think tanks cannot be funded openly from the MOD budget. That's the way, look at how the Americans operate. Whether you like it or not, MAGA, Trump, is Project 2025. The whole idea was crafted in the Hudson Institute. So this is something that we must do. And if we have to give a further fillip to strategic communications, just the last point, military diplomacy must also be given a fillip. I think our military diplomacy is undermining today. When Europe is rearming, Brussels is without a DA, neither with the NATO nor with the European Union. I happened to be in Washington when Asim Munir was there. You see, the problem is not that Asim Munir was lunched by Trump. Asim Munir was the toast of every Washington think tank because they have penetrated it so deeply. They use military diplomacy well. It was his equation with Kuruvilla which opened the doors of Shehbaz Sharif to Trump. So in this larger sense, we have done very well in operations. I think our media engagement was pretty good in Sindoor. But if we have to take it to the next level, it has to be strategic communications in this very wide-angle sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you very much. I think several points to take away from there, but we'll discuss that. Can I request Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj, please? Thank you.
With all of you, and I think this is a very compelling topic and a very timely seminar, therefore, and my congratulations to the organizers. Well, I think speaking as the last amongst a panel of 3, and after Nitin also, I think a lot has already been said, that communication must be quick, it must be in real time, it must be credible, you must be able to build trust, it should be anticipatory, it should not be propaganda, it should not be spin, it should be audience-centered. I think all of that has been said. And of course, that you must be able to quell disinformation very quickly and in real time. So I think all of those points have been made, and I agree with all of that. I think we are living in a time where there is an information ecosystem where all of these various actors, the media, the government, civil society, all of them interact to make a very compelling mix. And as a country, our job is to be ready to react to the situation, not reaction as in, I think that point has already been made, that our policies cannot be reactive. They cannot be ad hoc, and hence there is need for institutionalization. But I think we should be ready also to claim and take this space. Couple of very positive developments, I think, which I should mention, because most of the time I noticed that the interventions were about, we haven't done this and we haven't done that, and of course we haven't done this and that, but I think we are getting our act together, which is also to say that it is important also to continuously improve. Let me give you some concrete examples. Somaliland. All of you would recall that there was a rumor that was spread that India was moving on to recognize Somaliland. And that wasn't true, of course. So very quickly, what happens? MEA Fact Check comes into play. Yes, there is a handle called MEA Fact Check, and it quickly dispelled those rumors, and then that was further amplified by PIB Fact Check. So obviously something is happening there. And as citizens of the country, you go there, and why do you believe these handles? Simply because you trust these handles. So I think that's a very important point, and I think all of the speakers before me have also spoken about building trust. Similarly, aside from that, you had the very recent incident of Iran. There was again a very quick rumor that the Americans have been using Indian bases to launch attacks on Iran. And very quickly, I think again the MEA fact check handle, which was further endorsed by the PIB fact check angle, dispelled that rumor very quickly also. And I think all of us believe that, which is again a question of trust, which these two examples have been given to you to just show that yes, certain improvements have been made in India, recognizing that we have not been quite up to the task in recent times. Equally, I did want to draw your attention to something else, which I experienced myself when I was particularly ambassador in Bhutan. There were times, earlier days in diplomacy, when I joined the service, there were closed door rooms, there were discussions, there were negotiations, there were decisions, and then communication followed. Today, of course, as we all know, and that's what we are discussing, it's a totally different time. Everything happens, a lot happens rather, even before policies are there. So you have communication which precedes policy, communication which accompanies policy, and communication which shapes policy outcomes. So that brings me to another example where I do believe we succeeded, which was the days of COVID-19. Just recall those days when India was projecting itself as the pharmacy of the world. And if you ask me the question, did we succeed in creating that narrative? My answer would be yes. I lived that experience, and very quickly, just to recall, I was in Bhutan. There was an Indian Air Force plane that landed in Bhutan, deposited the vaccines, and immediately took off. And those images went viral in the country. And then I think we repeated that with so many countries. The figure that is often cited is you gave about 240 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines to over 100 countries. And believe me, when I was in New York too, there were so many ambassadors from the smaller countries. And as all of you know, the small states make about 50% of the entire membership of the United Nations. Many small states ambassadors who came across and told me that your country was the very first country that provided vaccines to us at a time when vaccines were not available, and at a time some countries were disposing and throwing off expired vaccines. So I think that narrative that India built, even as you were distributing the vaccines, so the vaccines were going, but you were also shaping a narrative at the very same time. So I think that is one example where you shaped the narrative very successfully, and the narrative was, no guesses, India was the pharmacy of the world. India was extending a helping hand to smaller countries at a time when they needed this assistance the most. So that was a very powerful narrative of India as a friend of the Global South. I'll give you one more example that is not Indian before I conclude. A lot of the speakers before me spoke about communication not being reactive, communication not being ad hoc, and about communication that is institutionalized. That is, you have a narrative that is woven into the fabric of the country, a narrative that works in crisis time and a narrative that works in calm. And one very useful example, which I saw myself when I was posted as ambassador to the United Nations, was the question of Finland's membership of NATO. So after the Ukraine crisis, as Russia invaded or entered Ukraine, Finland, of course, was a neutral country. And at that time, if you asked any Finn this question, should Finland be a member of NATO? There was very little support for that. Say about 25% of Finns probably believe that Finland should be a member of NATO because of the Russian threat. But over a period in time, and as all of you might know, the process to become a NATO member takes time. There is a laid out step-by-step process, which is the Finns first went to parliament and got parliamentary approval. After that, they applied for NATO membership. After that, they signed the instrument of accession. And thereafter, finally, there was the ratification procedure. But through this entire period, the government of Finland was in constant contact with the people. That is an example of anticipatory action, and also an example where there is no propaganda, there is no spin, but you are actively sharing the information with your people. So there was constant social media messaging, there were constant messages from the government, from the presidency, and through this period, you built trust. And at the end of the process, we are told that the Finns, when they joined NATO, about 75 to 80% of the people were convinced that Finland should join NATO. So from a 25% base, you moved to an 80% base simply because you were constantly sharing information, credible, factual, correct information. And I think this is the point that I would also like to stress upon, also stated by some of the previous speakers, that there is a difference between strategic communication and spin, or strategic communication and propaganda. Because what is spin? Spin is you're sugarcoating the truth. And propaganda is to some extent manipulation. But strategic communication, as I've given you this example, and many other examples too, has to be real, of course, has to be quick, has to be factual, it has to be anchored in honesty, and it has to be anchored in the truth. I think that is when it works. And my very last point, very often when we talk about strategic communication, we talk about authoritarian systems and compare ourselves sometimes unfavorably with authoritarian systems. Sure, I will agree. Authoritarian systems have the advantage of speed. You just send the message out, and because there is no dissonance, there are no competing voices, so the message gets out there very quickly, and maybe in the short term, you win that battle. But at the end of it, if you really look at it, in the absence of competing voices, in the absence of the ability of the citizens of a country to verify that information. If you're just getting information from one source, how can you verify it? Supposing you want to verify it, you don't get that verification advantage. So in the longer term, what really wins, and this is the point that I would like to end on, in the longer term, what really wins is credibility. What really wins is if the information narrative of any country is anchored in truth, and importantly, if your action
internally. If that is the state, then I think it will never have a credibility.
Well, that is
So that is an aspect which is possibly one of the reasons why we are not really in a position to go ahead with it.
True. Exactly. I think that was the point. The mic, yahan dena.
So thank you very much. I'm from one of the think tank in local, so I had to say thanks to General Raj Shukla and to you. My basic point is last 6 years or 7 years, the think tanks beside the Delhi We are in number of places working, and we have some credit. But what we see in the media, when the defense analysis, or you can say experts, they go, they don't have any credits. It's not these think tanks are good enough to have a credible information about any kind of operation which is going on, like lately, Ops Indur, we can talk now about Israel. And so that is where we need, the think tank has to be supported in environment for the communication. And these think tanks are basically based with the veterans. They have got number of knowledge. They have got the experience in all fields. So I'm grateful to General Shukla, and I can say that you can think it over of exploring the possibility, decentralizing these think tanks from Delhi to other region also. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a more of a comment, but you have a question there? Yeah.
So my question is regarding the credibility baggages of the media houses. How do we stop?
What packages?
So credibility baggages
Credibility, okay.
of the media houses. How do we stop those baggages from becoming the baggages of our dissemination of information? And is there a need for depoliticizing the selection of the hierarchy of dissemination of information, sir? And the second part is that, sir, doesn't fact-checking become an internal tussle? And at the end, we end up becoming a laughing stock again. What is the need for fact-checking when we can regulate it at the earlier dissemination point only, sir? Thank you.
Well, anyone wants to answer that question? Yeah.
No, I'll just take one of the points I think raised by the General about why is it that you have so many multiple messaging channels. You have PIB fact check, you said, you have MEA fact check, and you have others also now emerging. But the point is that you see, we cannot follow necessarily, and the word I stress upon is necessarily, a centralized system like some countries have. Like Singapore, for instance, I know I used to interact a lot with their diplomats. They have a very centralized system. I think it's called gov.sg. Now, gov.sg is a portal or a website, and it has social media handles. So everything is there in one place. And every citizen goes there to get the latest information on everything. That's fine, but that's a different country. In India, because we are a democracy and a pluralistic structure where you have the center, you have the states, you have regional actors, I think it might be quite okay to have several channels, but importantly, and here I stress, there might be several voices, but the message should be the same.
Uniform message is what is required.
Yeah, a uniform message is needed. So the point I'm trying to make is that we can manage with more voices.
Sure.
Like you have MEA, you have all of our missions abroad. Every mission now is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever.
Right.
Then you have MEA fact check. Then you have the army and defense handles. You have the naval spokesperson, and so forth. And you have so much more that is emerging. It's okay, I think, because we are a large pluralistic country with a federal structure. However, it is very important. If one voice is nullifying the other, or they are not speaking with one voice, then that's a problem.
Nitin, can I take a second? Because on what she said, you see, you take the day what Pakistan calls Kashmir Black Day.
Right.
Interestingly, the MEA will have a separate hashtag. The MOD will have a separate hashtag. The MHA will have its own hashtag. How the hell do you talk about one line?
So,
No, but that's the point I made.
exactly. Yeah,
the
exactly.
point is that you must coordinate.
Yeah,
So you're
that
talking about
coordination
hashtags.
is what I was talking about,
Why
yeah.
should you have different hashtags?
Yeah, exactly.
You're supposed to speak
Yeah, I'll
with
give
one
you-
voice.
Raj, 1 minute. I
That's
think
the
I'll
problem.
ask,
We have to get our act up there. We have to lift our act there.
I'll ask Yash to speak and then Raj.
I won't get into that because I think DG Stratcom
Is
General
what he's
Shukla
saying.
talk about that.
Yeah.
No, but the point that you made, General, about perception management, I think that is the biggest challenge that we face in Stratcom and narrative building. And particularly in a country like India. One example, the killing of the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei. Now, the perception that was immediately promoted, and I mean, by the opposition, which is their right, of course, but then look how it impacts the wider region. That India didn't condone the death of the Supreme Leader. Now, why didn't we condone that? I will not get into that. I think I know. I happened to meet the gentleman twice during my course of my tenure in MEA, but that's not the point. He's a very learned person, spiritual person, etc. But the fact is that there was a conscious decision taken by government to not condone, and that was taken amiss by certain sections in our country, trying to highlight a communal agenda, which was not at all the reason. The reason was something else.
More geopolitical than...
Absolutely. And geopolitical and the past history. His statements, if you see catalogue on Kashmir, etc. I'm not saying that you don't condole someone who speaks badly against you. Must. I personally felt
What timing?
bad.
I think
But
was
the
important.
question was timing. When you had the foreign secretary go and sign the condolence book, that itself sent out a message. So perception management is always going to be a challenge in a huge, diverse
country like
democracy like ours.
Absolutely.
But that's why
That's the
it's
challenge.
all the more important.
Exactly. Raj,
See,
do
fact-checking,
you want to answer that question also of the political baggage of channels and all that? But I'll answer that if you can't, if you don't.
so, see, fact-checking of absolute lies, fake stuff,
Yes.
is obviously must be done.
Right.
But I want to make a larger point. Media communications doesn't happen in a utopian world.
Sure.
There are times you conceal. There are times you don't speak the full
True.
truth. So I'll give
Strategic
you
silence. I call it
But-
strategic
but-
silence.
But the democratic process balances out. So very
True.
recently, Dan Kane,
Yes.
in that briefer he's asked, he just makes the point that 7 or 6 American soldiers were killed.
Yes.
And then independently, somebody else talks of the F-15s going down.
Right.
It is New York Times who connects the dots, which
Sure.
is what? That when a drone killed 6 people, these people were on an edge, the
Right.
pilot goes up because people say, how did the drone go
Yes.
down? And the F-15 gets down.
Yes.
That kind of joining the dots will be done by a media.
Yes.
So why do we want a unitary narrative? We don't want. Dan Kane will say what he has to.
Sure.
He will conceal what he has to.
Absolutely.
But the democracy will do it. And
Yeah.
the second point I want to make about these think tanks, while I'm a big advocate of think tanks should not become retirement clubs. No, because they will lose their credibility and legitimacy. They
Right.
should be with a professional
Younger
at the
people.
top and very well-paid researchers.
Yes.
And if
Right.
you want to see serious stuff that has been churned out by think tanks, don't look at the Americans, look at the Chinese.
Yes, they do
Even
that.
better serious stuff.
I know. But that answer, just let me answer that question and conclude. Political baggage, I would urge you, in a diverse and democratic country like India, there will be political baggage in channels and newspapers. You have to choose who do you want to read, who do you want to watch, and who do you want to believe. We cannot control the political baggage of the owners, the editors, the reporters. We cannot do that, and we should not do it. Because that's the strength that we have. We should play up on that strength is what I would think. On that note, let me thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to conduct and moderate this session. I hope there are some takeaways from here. If there are questions, do meet the panelists offline and satisfy your queries if you have that. But thank you very much. I conclude here. Thank you.
Experts, thank you very much. We'll request you to please remain on the stage for the felicitation ceremony. And to do the honors, may I please request the Army Commander, General Sen Gupta, to please step forward and help us in extending our little way of saying thank you to our experts for putting forth this structured conversation indeed around civil-military media engagement in the information space. We begin felicitating Ambassador Yashwardhan Sinha. Thank you very, very much, Ambassador Sinha. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for those applauses. We'd also like to thank Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj. Ma'am, thank you very much. General Shukla, thank you so much for your perspectives that indeed help us understand how warfighting function ensures seamless integration of intelligence, diplomacy, and military messaging. And of course, thank you to you, Shri Gokhale. General Sen Gupta, thank you so much for doing the honors there as well. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, of course, let's have a photograph, yes, sounds good, of our experts with our presenter on stage together. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we do come to an end of the expert session. They say that great conversations definitely deserve a great cup of tea. But first up, we will request our panelists and Major Generals and ranks above to please proceed for the group photograph outside. Rest of the members in the audience are hereby requested to remain seated and first allow, please, our dignitaries to proceed for the group photograph. You're requested to join for the tea thereafter. As you already know, that the tea is being laid out in the lawns and also in the area towards your left. Allow me to share with you that we will commence with our next session, which is the first panel discussion in the next 30 minutes. You all are requested.
होली के रंग अनेक पर ध्यान सबका खींचे एक खेलम खेली के बीच भी ठंडाई के साथ में खाई मिठाई से अलग कुछ आई लाल हरा गुलाब पर दिल मांगे गोल्डन जनाब
मगेन बनेगा